Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. Here we will take up the news articles from The Hindu Delhi edition and discuss them as per the demands of UPSC Civil Services exam. The topics for today's discussion are listed on your screen. Let us begin our discussion. The first article of today's discussion is based on this news which featured at page number 12 in The Hindu. This news specifically deals with the higher education system in India. And the context is that the Union Education Minister has announced new regulations for deemed to be universities aiming to promote quality, research and transformation in higher education. The topic of higher education is relevant for General Studies paper 2, under which education is specifically mentioned in the UPSC mains syllabus. And previously in 2021, UPSC has specifically asked a question on vocational education and skill training. And similarly, in 2015, a question was asked on quality of higher education in India. And you need to discuss whether the entry of foreign educational institutions would help in improving the quality of higher and technical education in country. So, by looking at these questions, we get to know that education is an important area on which UPSC repeatedly asks questions in mains exam. And as rightly said by our Prime Minister, for the progress of any country, education should not only be inclusive but should be equitable. In today's discussion, we will try to analyze the issues of higher education in India, the provisions under new education policy of 2020, and a roadmap to improve the prospects of higher education in India. Firstly, we will discuss the issues of higher education. The first one is gross enrollment ratio. In higher education, India has gross enrollment ratio of 28% in comparison to 36% of the global average, which is much lower than the most of the developed countries. The second one is lack of quality research work. Due to limited focus on research and internationalization, very few Indian higher education institutes are globally recognized. And according to data from various resources, India accounts for only 4% of the global research output. Further, India only spends 0.7% of the GDP on research and development, and on the other hand, China spends around 2.5% of its GDP. Hence, it is an important issue of the higher education system. The third one is outdated curriculum. In most of the higher educational institutions, the curriculum is outdated and irrelevant, which further impacts the quality of education which we are providing to the young generation. The fourth one is shortage of faculty and high student-faculty ratio. In most of the state and central universities, more than 30% of the faculty positions are lying vacant. And the Indian higher education system has a student-teacher ratio of 29, while the same for United States is around 12 and Brazil around 19. And as per the Ministry of Education, 40% of the seats are lying vacant in 23 IITs of the country. The next in the list is no accountability. There is no provision for the audit of teachers' performance in most of the institutions which are running across the country. And the next one is inadequate infrastructure and facilities. Apart from the highly recognized higher educational institutions, most of the colleges and universities lack in basic and high-end research facilities, and many of them are running without proper infrastructure such as library, hostels, transport and sports facility, which is desirable to rank the quality institution. Further, there is a less collaboration of higher educational institutions with industries, which further impacts the research and training work of young graduates. Further, there is a demographic dividend challenge. As per India Skills Report of 2022, only 46% of the graduates are eligible for employment, and it will eventually turn our demographic dividend to demographic disaster. The next is poor governance structure of educational institutions. And why it is happening? It is due to over-centralization, lack of transparency and professionalism at the management level. Further, there is a huge political interference in higher education institutions which impacts the autonomy of the institutions to work independently, which can be frequently seen in Delhi University and Jawaharlal Nehru University. There is a problem of brain drain in India. India faces a persistent issue of brain drain where highly talented individuals, researchers, and academicians leave the country in pursuit of better opportunities which are being provided to them in different countries. And this exodus impacts the growth and development of domestic higher education system, affordability and socio-economic barriers, specifically among disadvantaged groups. The cost of higher education in India is extremely high for many students, especially those who belong to economically disadvantaged sections. And the high tuition fees, coupled with the cost of living and limited availability of scholarships, hinders the quality of education, which further perpetuates social and economic inequalities. And as per the ASHE's report, the gross enrollment ratio for the general category is 26, for SCs it is 23, and for STs it is 17. Further, there is the issue of gender disparity. There are multiple factors behind low women enrollment in higher education institutions, like safety and limited support from the family and society. The issue of quality disparity. There is a significant disparity in the quality of education between top tier institutions and low ranked colleges. For example, IITs, IIMs, and AIMS, they offer world class education, and other institutions fail to maintain the same standards of education. And this leads to uneven learning outcomes and job prospects for students. As we have discussed multiple issues related to higher education in India, now we will try to analyze what the new education policy talks about education system. The vision of the policy is that it wants to transform India into a vibrant knowledge and global knowledge superpower through broad-based, flexible and multidisciplinary education which is suited for 21st century needs. And the focus is to bring the unique capabilities of each individual by providing adequate training and building confidence in them. And it emphasizes on critical thinking rather than rote learning. And the focus has shifted from studying to learning. Further, it aspires for integration of global with the local. And it will be done through exchange programs and joint research projects between different universities. And it aims to instill knowledge, skills, and values among Indian youth to make them global citizens. Now we will see what the new education policy talks about higher education system. The first point, gross enrollment ratio. It aims to increase the enrollment ratio in higher education, which includes vocational education also, to 50% by 2035. And there is a focus on broad-based, multidisciplinary, holistic higher education. Further, there is a provision of multiple entry and exit with proper certification. And the next one is Academic Bank of Credit. It will digitally store the academic credits so that these can be counted and transferred towards final degree earned. And there is a special focus on mentoring and guiding students in the right field. And for that, National Mission for Mentoring will be set up. And lastly, the multidisciplinary education and research universities at par with IITs will be set up to build capabilities among youth in different fields of education, which will eventually make them all-rounder in real life. Now we will see the roadmap for future. The first is ensure quality education. There is a need to implement rigorous accreditation process to ensure quality standards in universities and colleges, and encourage universities to seek international accreditation to boost global recognition. For example, IASC Bangalore achieved top positions in international rankings and enhanced its reputation. The next one is strengthen R&D ecosystem. We need to promote collaborations between academia and industry to facilitate technology transfer and commercialization of research. For instance, IITs have collaborated with various industries to develop innovative solutions and products. And there is a need to establish research center of excellence in specialized fields, for example, machine learning, artificial intelligence, data science, to attract talented researchers and scholars. And a classical example in this regard is Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. It is a renowned institution for its contribution to physics and mathematics. The next area which needs to be focused is teacher training. We need to invest in faculty training programs to enhance their methodologies, research skills, and to give them industry exposure. We also need to recognize and award exceptional faculty members through performance based incentives, grants, and fellowships. And the next in the list is digital education. As the world is moving towards digitization, we need to tap the potential of digital education. Government should promote the use of online platforms, massive open online courses, and virtual classrooms to widen the access to quality education. Further, the initiatives like SWAYAM and NPTEL offer various online courses from renowned institutions, and these kind of initiatives needs to be scaled up. We need to have livelihood colleges, as it will create more pathways to employment in organized sector. The state of Chhattisgarh is specifically focusing on this particular aspect. We also need to enhance the industrial cooperation, and it can be done through expert lectures, counseling, and live projects in which the young graduates will learn the real life applications of the subjects which they are being taught. And finally, the international collaboration. As our Prime Minister has repeatedly said, in today's globalized world, we cannot grow in isolation. We need to join hands with other countries to improve the future prospects of our young generation. And how it can be done? We need to facilitate partnerships between Indian universities and reputed international institutions like MIT and Harvard to foster exchange programs and joint research projects which will give students an international exposure. Further, we need to promote the recruitment of international faculty members to diversify the academic environment and bring in diverse perspectives. And to conclude your answer, you can mention the SDG Goal 4, which talks about quality education for all. And we all know education is a powerful force that drives the progress across sustainable development goals. By investing in quality education, we can empower individuals, transform societies, and create a sustainable future for generations to come. So, it is essential that governments, policymakers, educators, and stakeholders work together to prioritize and promote education as a key strategy in achieving the sustainable development goals. Moving on to the next topic, which is based on this news, which featured at page number 10 in The Hindu. It basically talks about bankruptcy code, which government brought in 2016. And the context of this news is that Indian National Congress has criticized Modi government, accusing it of low debt recovery under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Insolvency and bankruptcy is an important issue under Indian banking system, and it is relevant for the General Studies paper 3, under which the economic development has been mentioned. The focus of today's discussion will be the difference between insolvency and bankruptcy, the objective of IBC, and the challenges which are being faced by IBC. And then we will have a way forward. First of all, let us try to understand what is insolvency and bankruptcy. Insolvency refers to a state where a person or a company is unable to meet their financial obligations. It means that they have more liabilities, that means debts, than their assets. And it signifies a financial distress or inability to repay debts when they become due. And it can happen due to multiple reasons, such as poor financial management or economic downturns. And on the other hand, bankruptcy is a legal procedure which is initiated by insolvent person or a company to seek relief from their debt. So, it is a formal declaration which says a person or a company cannot pay their debt. Hence, in this case, one has to go through court procedure and it involves a legal process. And in order to address the insolvency and bankruptcy, Union government has came up with Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of 2016, and the objective of IBC is to create a single comprehensive framework that would provide a time-bound and cost-effective process for resolving insolvency and bankruptcy. Hence, it was done to strengthen the Indian banking system and to push for economic growth. Now we will try to understand the challenges with respect to insolvency and bankruptcy code. The first one is lack of infrastructure and resources. One of the major challenge has been the lack of adequate infrastructure and resources to handle the increasing number of insolvency cases, especially after COVID pandemic. And it includes insolvency courts, qualified professionals and professional agencies. And due to lack of these resources, we witness delays and inefficiencies in resolution process. The second one is lengthy resolution process. The IBC aims to expedite the insolvency resolution process. However, the process faced delays due to various reasons such as complex cases, multiple litigations, and legal challenges. For example, the resolution process of large cases like Esser Steel and Bhushan Steel took longer than expected, leading to prolonged litigation and delays in debt recovery. And the next is operational challenges. There have been many operational challenges in the implementing IBC effectively. For example, coordination among different stakeholders such as financial creditors, operational creditors, and resolution professionals can be a challenging task. Further, the involvement of multiple parties and conflicting interests can hinder the smooth progress of resolution process. The next is lack of clarity on jurisdiction. IBC has provisions for resolution of corporate, personal, or cross-border insolvency. And there have been instances of confusion and lack of clarity regarding the jurisdiction of different courts, which results in delays and disputes. Finally, the recovery of assets. While the IBC aims to facilitate the recovery of stressed assets, but the actual recovery has been lower than expected. And it is due to the lack of buyers, valuation issues, and inadequate bidding process. And the sale of certain assets under IBC has witnessed low recovery rates, leading to losses for creditors. And to address these challenges, government has taken several measures, which includes increasing the number of NCLT benches, increasing the number of professionals, and amending the IBC to address practical challenges. And what can be the way forward? The first point is the process of mediation should be institutionalized and appropriately integrated in the corporate insolvency resolution process, which is also known as CRP, with adequate provisions to exclude the time taken in mediation process. Further, there is a need to set up additional benches of NCT and National Company Law Appellate Tribunal to reduce the pendency of cases. And finally, there should be training of professionals who are given responsibility to handle the cases so that the insolvency and bankruptcy process can be concluded in a time-bound manner. A quick recap to our discussion. Firstly, we discussed the context, its relevance for General Studies Paper 3. We analyzed the difference between insolvency and bankruptcy and the objective of IBC 2016 and the challenges with respect to IBC and a way forward. Moving on to the next topic, which is based on this news, which has appeared on page number 10 in The Hindu. It basically talks about the Sedition law of India. And the context is that Law Commission of India has opined that Section 124A of Indian Penal Code should be retained with some procedural safeguards. It deals with the aspects of fundamental rights of citizens which are provided to them by the Indian Constitution. And it comes under General Studies Paper 2, in which a constitution is directly mentioned. And previously, UPSC asked about the scope of fundamental rights in the light of judgment passed by Supreme Court on right to privacy. Sedition has been in news since very long time. So there are high chances that it can come in 2023 mains exam. In this discussion, we are not going to discuss what the sedition is and what are the provisions regulating sedition, as it was covered in detail in yesterday's DNS. Today we will analyze the reasons for demand of repeal of sedition law and the reasons for retaining sedition as a crime and the recommendations of Law Commission. In S.G. Wombakere case, Supreme Court demands the review of sedition law. Supreme Court bench last year decided to put in abeyance all cases of sedition and directed state and center governments not to register any fresh FIR invoking the offence. And court also directed union government to examine the sedition law as it found that sedition law is not in sync with the current times. You can mention this particular case to bring authenticity in your answer. Now we will see what are the reasons for demand of sedition law. The first one is sedition has a chilling effect on free speech and expression. Further, there have been alleged misuse of sedition law for curbing political dissent. It will hamper the constructive criticism of government policies, which goes against the democratic principles of Indian political system. Thirdly, the vague definition of sedition law leading to erroneous interpretation, as it has not been defined explicitly under IPC, and which gives a scope for the misuse. It is very easy to use this law because of the lack of checks and safeguards. Further, there are chances for the overzealous application of this law to please political masters. Now we will understand the reasons for retaining sedition as a crime. The first one in this regard says, for safeguarding the unity and integrity of India. It is the prime duty of an elected government to safeguard the state and its institutions against external and internal attack. And the section 124A provides a prompt and effective mechanism for suppression of disintegrating tendencies and protect and preserve the integrity of Indian state. It also acts as a deterrent for persons who want to commit acts of incitement to violence and acts causing disturbance of public order. So, it is important for maintaining the unity and integrity of state. The second reason is sedition is a reasonable restriction under Article 19, Clause 2. The First Amendment of Indian Constitution incorporated public order, friendly relations with foreign states, and incitement to offence as a reasonable restriction under Article 19. Further, Supreme Court in Kedarnath Singh case held that sedition was constitutional restriction under the ambit of reasonable restrictions to speech and expression. So, it is not violative to the Indian Constitution. Thirdly, the existence of counter-terror legislations does not obviate the need for Section 124A. Critics argue that the counter-terror laws like UAPA, National Security Act, makes the sedition law irrelevant. However, these special anti-terror laws deals with national security, seek to prevent or punish the commission of offences targeted towards state. And on the other hand, sedition law seeks to prevent violent, illegal and unconstitutional overthrow of a democratically elected government established by law. Further, sedition being a colonial legacy is not a valid ground for its repeal. Many critics argue that sedition is a colonial legacy and was used against freedom fighters. However, if we go by this logic, then the entire legal system of India should be overthrown, as India's legal system is a colonial legacy. And moreover, Constitution of India provides ample space and liberty to the people to indulge in healthy and constructive criticism of their government in a democratic setup. And there is a need to penalize those who seek to incite violence and cause public disorder in the guise of right to freedom of speech and expression. Lastly, realities differ in every jurisdiction. We have seen many arguments, such as many advanced countries have repealed the sedition law from their law books, and India should follow the same. But the ground realities and security concerns of every country are different. And even the countries which have repealed sedition law have made cosmetic changes in the law of sedition without taking away the core of sedition law. As we have broadly discussed the reasons for retaining sedition, now we will take forward our discussion to analyze the recommendations of Law Commission on sedition. Incorporation of ratio of Kedarnath judgment of section 124A of IPC. In Kedarnath Singh case, Supreme Court held that unless the words used or actions in question do not tend to incite violence or cause public disorder or cause disturbance to the public peace, only on them sedition law will be applicable. Further, procedural guidelines for preventing any alleged misuse of section 124A of IPC. To prevent any misuse of sedition law, Law Commission has suggested that certain procedural safeguards to be undertaken prior to the registration of FIR with respect to the commission of offence of sedition. And these procedural safeguards can be introduced by issuance of guidelines by central government or an amendment in section 154 of CRPC which deals with filing of FIR for cognizable offence. And the cognizable offence are those under which police is empowered to make an arrest without a warrant. Thirdly, removal of oddity in punishment prescribed for section 124 of IPC. Currently, the punishment prescribed for sedition is either life imprisonment or imprisonment for 3 years, but nothing in between. There is a need to reform the punishment prescribed for sedition under IPC to allow courts to award punishment in line with scale and gravity of the act committed. Just try to remember these recommendations as it can be used in some or other form in General Studies paper 2. A quick recap to our discussion. First of all, we discussed the context, its relevance for General Studies paper 2. We have also discussed a Supreme Court case and the reasons for demand of repeal of sedition and the reasons for retaining sedition as a crime and the recommendations of Law Commission. Lastly, we will discuss a case study which appeared in General Studies paper 4 in 2020 mains. This case study talks about the migrant workers who remained at socio-economic margins of our society. And the crux of this case is that during COVID pandemic, there was a countrywide lockdown, and due to that, large number of migrant workers decided to move back to their native places. And their problem was further increased due to the loss of livelihood and lack of basic facilities like food and shelter. And the question says, you have learned many lessons from this situation when you were tasked to oversee the functioning of District Disaster Relief Force in your district. In your opinion, what are the ethical issues in current migrant crisis? What do you understand by ethical caregiving state? And what assistance can civil society render to mitigate the sufferings of migrants in similar situations? And you need to answer in 250 words. The framework for this case study: firstly, you need to write an introduction, and in this case, you can highlight the core issues of the case, or you can use the stakeholders approach. Then the question says, what are the ethical issues involved in the case? Here, you need to write 3 to 4 ethical issues, and then you should explain what is the ethical caregiving state and write down the contributions of civil society in such crisis. And you can write a generalized conclusion to deal with such problem at national or global level. Now, what can be the ethical issues involved in this case? The first one is lack of empathy and care for migrant workers. The migrant workers were forced to go home because of the lockdown, as they were deprived of the basic amenities like food, water and shelter. So, there is a lack of empathy and care for migrant workers. The second one is bureaucratic exploitation. These workers were also subjected to police brutality and harassment at many places, and many videos were circulated across media on this particular issue. The third one is lack of good governance. As we all know, there is a social contract between state and citizens, and due to that particular agreement, there is a responsibility on state to provide for the welfare of people. And in this regard, the response of government was inadequate and the workers were left to fend for themselves. And the last one is lack of wisdom. Here in this case, both the sides, government and migrant workers, have failed to show wisdom. The government has failed to plan the arrangements with highest level of wisdom. And on the other hand, migrant workers failed to realize the hardships of their decision to migrate barefoot. And the second part of question says, what do you understand by ethical caregiving state? An ethical caregiving state means a government that prioritizes the welfare of its citizens, especially the most vulnerable. And government should be proactive to deal with such emergencies. There is a need for empathy and compassion in government officials to deal with such unforeseen situation. And lastly, you need to write on the role of society in similar situations. Civil societies play a crucial role in mitigating the sufferings of migrants in similar situations, as they can provide basic facilities like food, water, and shelter to the workers. And they can also help them in accessing medical care and other essential services such as transportation. Civil society organizations can also advocate for the rights of migrant workers and hold the government accountable for its actions. And it can be done with the help of media, both print and social media. Thus, it is clear that public servants should be empathetic in their behavior and civil society should play an active role to deal with such emergencies. That's all for today's discussion. Thank you for watching today's DNS. Stay tuned for upcoming sessions which will enhance your preparation for the mains exam which is going to be conducted by UPSC in September 2023.